Good afternoon, class. I will be discussing pathology practical classes number 26, 27, and 28. That includes the following raw specimens. Those are the chronic pyelonephritis, chronic glomerulonephritis, hydronephrosis, polycystic kidney, renal calculus, vesical calculus, renal cell carcinoma, and Wilms tumor. And the slides which I'll be showing today are chronic pyelonephritis, chronic glomerulonephritis, renal cell carcinoma, and Wilms tumor. Wherever the gross of these following slide is discussed, simultaneously I'll be showing you the picture of the histopathological slides also. So let's get started with the class. The first topic I'm going to talk about now is of chronic pyelonephritis. Chronic pyelonephritis is inflammation of the kidney. It is a tubulointerstitial disease that is resulting from repeated attacks of inflammation and scarring. Depending upon the etiology and pathogenesis, there are two types of chronic pyelonephritis. One is a reflex nephropathy and the other is a obstructive pyelonephritis. Reflux nephropathy is reflux of urine from the bladder into one of the both of the ureters during maturation and is a major cause of chronic pyelonephritis. Vesicoureteral reflux is also a very common cause that is occurring in children, especially in girls. This reflux results in increase in pressure in the renal pelvis so that the urine is forced into the renal tubules, which is eventually followed by damage to the kidney and scar formation. The next cause is of obstructive pyelonephritis. Obstruction to the flow of the urine at different levels predisposes the kidney to infection. Recurrent episodes of such obstruction and infection result in renal damage and scarring. So coming to the morphological features, grossly the kidney is usually small in size. So firstly, whenever we are seeing a kidney, we want to see what happens to the size of the kidney, what happens to the external surface, and what will be there in the cut section. So here in a pyelonephritic case, what usually happens is that the kidney will be small and contracted. There will be unequal reduction which will distinguish it from the other forms of kidneys which are contracted in other diseases. So unequal reduction of the kidney is an important indicator here in the gross feature of chronic pyelonephritis. Now coming to the external surface of the kidney, the surface of the kidney is irregularly scarred and the capsule can be stripped off. So these scars are of variable size and they characteristically show a U-shaped depression. And on the cut section, we can see that there is blunting of the calyces and the pelvis is dilated. And in some of the calyces, we can see that it is filled by a brownish necrotic material. So important gross findings that we have seen here are: first, that there is loss of normal architecture. The capsule is firmly adherent, and the cut section is showing dilated and thickened renal pelvis and calyces, and some of the calyces here are showing a brown necrotic material. Now coming to the microscopy of a chronic pyelonephritis. It is a tubulointerstitial disease. So we will first see what happens in the interstitium. In the interstitium, we can see there is abundant fibrosis and it is filled with chronic inflammatory infiltrates, which are mainly composed of lymphocytes, plasma cells, and macrophages. Now coming to the tubules. The tubules show varying degrees of atrophy and dilatation. Dilated tubules, some of them may contain eosinophilic colloid cast, to which the term thyroidization of tubules is given, them being resembling the thyroid follicle. Next, coming to the blood vessels. The blood vessels here are showing that the vessel wall is thickened, and because of that thickening, the lumen is narrowed. So it is basically a obliterative endarteritis. Next, coming to the glomeruli. The glomeruli here, some of them are showing a periglomerular fibrosis. Most of them will be intact, but as the disease progresses, more glomeruli showing hyalinization will be seen. So that is all about the gross and microscopy of a chronic pyelonephritis. Next topic is of chronic glomerulonephritis. The other synonym for this is a end-stage kidney. So chronic glomerulonephritis is a final stage of a variety of glomerular diseases which result in an irreversible impairment of renal function. Some of the conditions which can progress to chronic glomerulonephritis are rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis, membranous glomerulonephritis, membranoproliferative, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, IgA nephropathy, and acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. And 20% of such cases can either be idiopathic. So coming to the morphology of these, here the kidneys are usually small and contracted and they weigh as low as 50 grams each. The capsule here would be adherent to the cortex, the cortical surface. So here is the external appearance of the kidney, where it is pale and it is diffusely granular, and on cut section we can see that the cortex is narrow, atrophic, and here the medulla is unremarkable. Even the corticular medullary junction cannot be made out. Coming to the microscopy of this condition, here we can see that the glomeruli are reduced in number, and most of those present show complete hyalinized tufts. They are giving the appearance of acellular eosinophilic masses. Now coming to the tubules, many tubules completely disappear, and those that are remaining will show atrophy. And some of the tubules even show hyaline droplets degeneration, and some of them being filled with eosinophilic homogeneous cast. Here the interstitium is fine and delicate. Fibrosis of the interstitial tissue is present, and there is varying number of chronic inflammatory cells, and vessels here will show arteriosclerosis. Some of the other changes can also occur here, which are sometimes there can be calcification of the tufts and deposition of calcium oxalate crystals in the tubules. So those were the gross and microscopic features of a chronic glomerulonephritis. The next specimen is of hydronephrosis. Hydronephrosis is the term that is used for dilatation of renal pelvis and calyces due to partial or intermittent obstruction to the outflow of urine. It is divided into unilateral and bilateral hydronephrosis. Unilateral hydronephrosis occurs due to some form of ureteral obstruction at the PU junction, that is the pelvic-ureteric junction, and it is divided into three types of causes, which can be intraluminal, intramural, or extramural. Intraluminal, when there is a calculus that is present in the ureter or the renal pelvis. Intramural, when there is a stricture or if there is a neoplasm of the ureter or bladder. Extramural, when there is obstruction of the upper part of the ureter by the inferior renal artery or vein, or if there is pressure on the ureter from outside, such as because of the carcinoma, cervix, prostate, rectum, colon, or even cecum, or a retroperitoneal fibrosis. The next type is the bilateral hydronephrosis. This bilateral hydronephrosis is divided into congenital and acquired. Congenital can be because of atresia of the urethral meatus, or it can be a congenital posterior urethral valve. And acquired can be because of a tumor, or because BPH, that is the prostatic enlargement, or prostatic carcinoma, or even prostatitis. Now grossly, here we can see that the kidneys are enlarged in size. There is a moderate to marked enlargement, and there is extrarenal hydronephrosis that is characterized by dilatation of the renal pelvis medially in the form of a sac. Now as this dilatation progresses, it becomes a intrarenal hydronephrosis. So the advanced stage of that is called as a intrarenal hydronephrosis. So what we have to note here is that the kidney is slightly increased in size, and on the cut section here, on a better view, you can see there is marked dilatation of the renal pelvis and calyces, and there is destruction of the renal parenchyma, and the calyces are seem to be connected to each other. So these are the points that you have to remember for hydronephrosis, what it is, how it happens, what is a unilateral and a bilateral hydronephrosis, what is a extrarenal hydronephrosis, and what is a intrarenal hydronephrosis, and what you see on the gross. And also remember that the advanced form will be a intrarenal hydronephrosis when the pelvic calyceal system is dilated, destroying the renal parenchyma. The next specimen here is of polycystic kidney. Polycystic kidney, it is a disorder in which the major portion of the renal parenchyma is converted into cyst of varying size. And this polycystic kidney is divided into an adult type and infantile type. That is depending upon their inheritance. So the adult type is a autosomal dominant one, and the infantile type is a autosomal recessive one. So the most common one is the autosomal dominant polycystic kidney, in which you will see that the kidneys are bilaterally involved and the cysts are present diffusely. The kidneys are usually not abnormal at birth. They retain their normal function, but as they grow, symptoms start appearing in the adult life, and they present usually in the age of 30 to 50 years. So the kidneys are usually bilaterally enlarged, and they have a lobulated appearance on the external surface. And this lobulation you're seeing on the external surface here, that is because of the cysts that are present inside. And so normally what we have seen here is that in the polycystic kidney, that the kidneys are increased in size. On the external surface they are nodular, the capsule is stripped off, and on the cut section here you can see that they are that the kidney parenchyma is replaced by this cyst. Now these cysts are of varying size. You can see that your large cyst over here present on the right side of this image is measuring somewhere around 4 centimeters. That's the largest cyst, whereas smaller cysts are even present and they measure somewhere around 2 by 2 centimeters, like that. Now these cysts, the content of this cyst will be straw or yellow color fluid. Sometimes it can be a reddish brown material also. The renal pelvis and calyces are usually present, but they are generally distorted by the cyst in the later part of the life. And the cysts here, they do not communicate with the pelvis of the kidney. This is an important feature where you have to differentiate it from the hydronephrosis, that they are not communicating with the pelvis. Whereas in hydronephrosis, you saw that there is a dilatation and there is a communication that is present. So that is all about the specimen you are seeing here today. That is the polycystic kidney. The infantile form of polycystic kidney, it is distinct from the adult one. It is less common and it is transmitted as a autosomal recessive trait that occurs because of mutation on the chromosome 6. And morphologically the kidneys are usually bilaterally enlarged with, but they have a smooth external surface and they retain the normal reniform shape of the kidney. The cut surface of those kidneys will reveal small fusiform or cylindrical cysts that are radiating from the medulla and extend radially to the outer cortex. This gives the section surface of the kidney the sponge-like appearance, and no normal renal parenchyma will be recognized, whereas the pelvis, calyces, and the ureters will be normal in the infantile form of the polycystic kidney. Next specimen here you are seeing is of renal calculi. Now renal calculi is also called as nephrolithiasis, and it is divided into 4 types of urinary calculi. The first type is the calcium stones. The calcium stones are the most common, that is comprising about 75% of the all urinary calculi. They may be pure form of calcium stones, or they can be even calcium phosphate or a mixture of calcium oxalate and calcium phosphate. The etiology for this will be either there will be a idiopathic hypercalciuria or a hypercalcemia, and a hypercalciuria that can be associated with a hyperparathyroidism, or they can even be a hyperuricosuria with a normal blood uric acid level, or simply they can be idiopathic calcium stone disease. So these are some of the causes of the formation of calcium in the kidney that results in stones. So why this happens is there is usually an imbalance between the degree of supersaturation of the ions forming the stone and the concentration of inhibitors in the urine, and this forms a nidus for this calcium crystals to form. And even the other contributory factors can be alkaline urinary pH, or decreased urinary volume, or increased excretion of oxalate and uric acid. So these are some of the etiopathogenesis that are causing the calcium stones. Now the morphology of these stones is they are usually small, ovoid, hard, and with a granular rough surface, and sometimes they can have this dark brown color because of the blood pigment that is deposited in them because of the repeated trauma that is caused to the urinary tract by the sharp edges of these stones. So here you can see there are multiple stones which are whitish in color. The largest one is measuring 6 centimeter in diameter, and the smallest one is round, and that is measuring 3 by 3 centimeters in diameter. The other 3 types of stones, a little information about them. The next type of stone is a struvite stone, that is also called as a mixed stone. That is contributing to about 15% of all the renal calculi, and it is made up of magnesium, ammonium, calcium phosphate, also called as the triple phosphate stones. The etiology of this is it results from infection of the urinary tract with a urea splitting organism that produce urease such as protease, and occasionally even organisms like Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, and Enterobacter can form these stones. Now these stones will be yellow, white, or grey, and they will be soft, friable, and irregular in shape, and they are staghorn Staghorn stone, which is a large solitary stone that takes the shape of renal pelvis where it is often formed. That Staghorn stone is an example of Stewart stone. The next type of stone is the uric acid stone that approximately accounts for 6% of all the urinary calculi. And this uric acid calculi is radiolucent compared to the calcium stones which were radio opaque. So the etiology for a uric acid stone would be a hyperuricemia or a hyperuricosuria. That can be because of a primary or a secondary gout. Secondary gout can be because of myeloproliferative disorder. So that is the etiology for a uric acid stone. And these stones are usually smooth yellowish brown hard, and they will be often multiple, and on cut section they will show a laminated appearance. The last type of stones are the cystine stones, which comprises of less than 2% of the urinary calculi. They are usually associated with cystinuria due to a genetically determined defect in the transport of cystine and other amino acid across the cell membrane of the renal tubules and the small intestinal mucosa. So the pathogenesis of this stone would be excessive excretion of cystine, which is least soluble, results in the formation of cystine calculi. Now morphologically these stones will be small, rounded, smooth, and often they will be multiple, and they will be yellowish and waxy. Now some other type of calculi that will be comprising about less than 2% would be because of inherited abnormality of enzyme metabolisms like hereditary xanthonuria developing from xanthine stones. So these were the four types of stones and the other stones that you have to remember. You'll have to remember what is the etiology of each of this, the pathogenesis, and what is the morphology. Morphology being the most important to describe this specimen. Here is another specimen that is showing a single oval shaped stone that is measuring somewhere around 3 by 4 centimeters, which is looking white and it is looking smooth. So this is a phosphate stone, and that is a stone from the bladder. So these was about the stones of the bladder and the kidney. Next, coming to the topic renal cell carcinoma. Renal cell carcinoma is adenocarcinoma of the kidney. It is also referred to as hypernephroma or the Goretz tumor. It is an adenocarcinoma that is arising from the tubular epithelium. It comprises about 70 to 80% of all renal cell cancers, and it occurs mostly in 50 to 70 years of age with a male preponderance. The etiology for a renal cell carcinoma will be tobacco. Tobacco is a major risk factor, and it has twofold higher risk of developing a RCC. Then coming to genetic factors, some of the syndromes that are associated with RCC are the von Hippel-Lindau disease, then a papillary or a chromosome RCC. They are also associated with other genetic diseases. Even clear cell RCC is also associated. Now coming to the other causes, cystic disease of the kidney. Both hereditary and acquired the cystic disease of the kidney have an increased risk of development of RCC. And some of the other risk factors are exposure to asbestos, heavy metals, petrochemical products, and in women, obesity and estrogen therapy, analgesic nephropathy, and even tuberous sclerosis. Now, based upon the cytogenetics of sporadic and familial tumors, RCC has been classified into clear cell, papillary, granular, chromophobe, sarcomatoid, and the collecting duct type. Now, coming to the morphology of this renal cell carcinoma, these tumors mostly arise from the poles of the kidney as solitary and unilateral tumor, most often in the upper pole, and it is usually large and well circumscribed. And if it's a papillary tumor, it will show papillae and it will be multifocal. So here you can see the external surface of the kidney that is showing that there is a here is a lobulated mass that is present on the upper pole, which is measuring 4 centimeters in diameter, and your cut section is showing that it is grey white variegated, and you can see areas of cystic change, hemorrhage, and necrosis. So these variation that is having cystic change, hemorrhage, necrosis is characteristic of this RCC. Now coming to the histological type, the most common type is of clear cell. Here is the histopathological slide of the clear cell RCC. the clear cytoplasm of the tumor cells is because of removal of glycogen and lipid from the cytoplasm during processing of tissues. Now these tumor cells, they have a variety of patterns. They can have either a solid pattern, trabecular, tubular, and they are separated by a delicate vasculature. So you can see that there is a solid pattern of tumor cells which is present, and the tumor cells look quite uniform. Even a glomeruloid pattern is appreciated in this picture, and you are seeing the clear cells and the granular cells. Now the granular cells have a acidophilic cytoplasm, and these cells will have marked nucleopolymorphism, hyperchromasia, and cellular atypia compared to the clear cells. And if it's a papillary type, the a papillary pattern will be appreciated with vascular stalks, and in the chromophobe type you will see a mixture of pale clear cells with perinuclear halo and acidophilic granular cells, and cytoplasm of these tumor cells will contain many vesicles. Coming to the other rare types, that is the sarcomatoid type and the collecting duct type. The sarcomatoid type is the anaplastic and purely differentiated type. It will have whorls of atypical spindle tumor cells present. And the collecting duct type, it is a rare type that occurs in the medulla, and it is composed of a single layer of cuboidal tumor cells which are arranged in tubular and papillary pattern. So that is about the renal cell carcinoma of the kidney, where you'll have to remember what causes it, what is the pathogenesis, how it is classified, morphologically what do you see, and what are the histological types of RCC. The last specimen of today's class is a Wilms tumor, which is also called as an nephroblastoma. It is an embryonic tumor that is derived from the primitive renal epithelial and mesenchymal components. It is the most common abdominal malignant tumor of young children that is seen mostly between 1 to 6 years of age, and they have a equal sex incidence. Now, coming to the etiology, here there is a defect in chromosome 11p13 that results in the abnormal growth of the metanephric blastema without differentiation into the normal tubules and glomeruli. It has a higher incidence in monozygotic twins, and it is also associated with other congenital anomalies, mostly being of genitourinary tract. And some of the other malignancies are also associated with Wilms tumor, like the retinoblastoma, neuroblastoma, and even osteosarcoma. So grossly, the tumor is quite large, spheroidal, and it replaces most of the kidney. It is generally solitary and unilateral, but in some cases a bilateral tumor can also be found. And here is the external surface of the tumor, where you are seeing that it is a large specimen that doesn't look like a normal kidney. The whole renal parenchyma seems to be replaced by the tumor, and it is measuring 8 by 6 by 5 centimeters. And here is the cut surface, where you are seeing that it is having a variegated appearance. It will have a fish flesh like grey white to cream yellow tumor, and it will have foci of necrosis and hemorrhage. So this tumor also has a variegated appearance, and it is a solid tumor, and it seems to be replacing the whole kidney. Now coming to the microscopy of this tumor, it has a mixture of primitive epithelial and mesenchymal elements. Most of the tumor consists of small, round to spindle anaplastic sarcomatoid tumor cells. Now, they also have abortive tubules and poorly formed glomerular structures. The mesenchymal elements such as smooth skeletal muscle, cartilage, bone, fat, and even fibrous tissue can be seen. So here you are seeing in this histopathological slide that most of the tumor contains of the blastomal cells, which are small round blue cells, and you can see there are abortive glomeruli that are present. Spindle stromal cells are also seen, and some rhabdomyoid differentiation is also seen. So this is all about the Wilms tumor, gross and microscopy. So that concludes our class today, where we have seen specimens of chronic pyelonephritis and glomerulonephritis, hydronephrosis, polycystic kidney. We have seen what are the types of stones, and finally we have seen two tumors, that is, one is renal cell carcinoma and the other being the Wilms tumor. Thank you.